Hey friends, before we get started, I'd really appreciate it if you could subscribe, like, and leave a comment. It would help the video out a lot, and it's an easy thing for you to do but means a lot to us. Thanks in advance.
Oh, hello. I saw your ad. Are you still renting out the apartment? Yes, I am. Can I come by to take a look? Of course. Are you planning to live alone? Yeah, I'm by myself. Great, I'll text you the address, so come around 5. Got it. Goodbye. I was looking for some cash and found gold, which is what I was talking about. I've been thinking for a while about moving out from my parents' place and checking out some options. But honestly, the prices for housing really bummed me out. I realized that with my income, I'd only be able to rent some rundown one-bedroom in the outskirts or an apartment in an old wooden building. Or maybe just a room in a dorm. To be honest, none of those options seemed appealing at all. But for a low price, who knows? Maybe I'll get lucky and it seems like I've found a decent option. So I was scrolling through listings and came across a one-bedroom place. The renovation isn't the most modern, but it's got all the appliances and furniture. It's about a 5-minute walk from the bus stop and not too far from my parents. I met with a nice woman in her 40s, just like we agreed. She showed me around, explained the neighborhood amenities, and asked when I could move in. I asked if the price was the same as in the listing, and she confirmed it was. I was curious why it was so cheap, and she said it's just that the renovation isn't the newest. That's why. The price is like that, and the furniture is old, you can see for yourself. I just shrugged. It's weird how rundown apartments cost as much as fancy ones. Anyway, let's see about the neighbors. How are they? They're all decent folks, so I'd recommend keeping the noise down after 10 p.m. The only thing is, she started talking and got all teary-eyed like she was thinking about whether to keep going. You see, there's an old lady living in the apartment across from you. She's quite elderly and sometimes acts a bit strange, but don't worry, she's harmless. Honestly, it's probably best not to talk to her too much. You know how things can go when you want to drop by. Better to do it sooner rather than later. So, we can go ahead and sign the contract now, and I'll leave you the keys. I skimmed through the contract quickly, handed Oksana the rent for a month in advance, and then headed home to grab my stuff. My parents were surprised I was leaving so soon, but overall they were okay with it and seemed pretty supportive. So at 9 p.m. I was sitting in the kitchen, sipping coffee. Most of my things were already put away, so I just zoned out and sat there. I was relaxing and soon felt like having a smoke. Oksana let me smoke in the apartment, so I went out on the balcony, flicked my lighter, and lit up. The quiet courtyard was right below my window. I looked down at it and was glad there was no playground down there, so I wouldn't have to hear kids screaming, shouting, and running around every time I opened the window. There were a few benches in our courtyard, but that was about it. Nobody was sitting on them. I guess everyone was hiding from the heat inside. It had been scorching for several days, hitting over 30 degrees Celsius, which is pretty intense for us. The heat was pretty rare, but surprisingly, I was handling it better than most of my friends. As I was thinking about how July doesn't spare anyone, I noticed an old lady walking through the yard. Just your average grandma, except she was dressed like it was freezing outside. 33 layers like people wear in winter, but there she was, all bundled up in summer. It was such a strange sight, it made me feel a bit uneasy. Wait a second, what if that's my neighbor the landlord mentioned? There were a bunch of people around, but I really wanted something tasty to eat. All I had in the fridge was some mayo and a pack of dumplings, definitely not what I needed. So I quickly got ready and stepped outside. As soon as I got to the stairwell, I ran into this old lady. She was the same one I'd seen wandering around the yard in her winter clothes. Guess she had her fill and was heading home. I practically bumped into her. "Oh my gosh, what are you doing here?" she shouted, clearly startled. She gave me a look but didn't say anything else. Once I was outside though, I've calmed down a bit and I'm not really sure what freaked me out so much. I got back home from the 24-hour store without any drama. Overall, I liked living in the rented apartment. I was on my own, and nobody was telling me how to live my life or what to do. I could sleep in until noon, spend the whole day on my laptop, or have friends over whenever I wanted. The landlady turned out to be pretty reasonable. She never showed up unannounced, and if she did come over, it was only for something important. The neighbors were cool too, especially the one across the hall. I used to be wary of that old lady though. Right now, I actually feel a bit sorry for her. Nobody ever visited Grandma. She didn't talk to anyone and just lived a quiet life. You could tell that Nelia was kind of struggling, but still, sometimes she would just hang out in the hallway for a long time, standing there and doing nothing. I wonder if she has any kids. Like I said, I felt a little sorry for her, so every time I went grocery shopping, I'd grab a little something for her too. Could be tea, a pack of cookies, or a carton of milk. I usually ran into her outside and would give her the stuff. She would hide from me and wouldn't say thank you, but honestly, I just wanted to help out. I was really struggling at the time, not exactly rolling in dough. One evening, I was by the stove, trying to whip up some dinner, when the boring routine was interrupted by a noise in the hallway. It sounded like it was coming from my floor, and I got curious about what was going on. I stepped out into the hallway and peeked through the peephole. What I saw made me jump. My neighbor was standing right in front of my door, staring at it without blinking. Ugh, I just can't get used to her weirdness. After getting over the shock, I turned around and headed back to the kitchen. I was done with cooking, and I suddenly wanted to peek through the peephole. I was curious if she was still there. Funny, she hadn't moved in 20 minutes. She was just standing there. Maybe she needed help. With that thought, I opened the door and asked, "Hello, what do you need, Grandma?" She looked at me with a guilty expression and said, "Grandson, please help me. My TV is broken, and I don't have money for a repairman. My pension will come soon, and I'll pay you what I can." I said, "No, it's okay, Grandma. Let's just see what's going on." When I stepped into her apartment, my heart sank with a wave of sadness. The place was just so dark and dreary. Sure, I get that she didn't have the cash for renovations, but the apartment itself was in pretty bad shape. Some of the wallpaper was peeling, the windows were dirty, and the kitchen curtains were a dull gray. Something told me they used to be white. There was no warmth to the place, no potted plants or towels with bright patterns, none of those little touches that you usually find in any home. I understand she's short on money, but still, we walked into the room and she pointed at, "I haven't seen an old wooden TV like this in 100 years. After half an hour, I managed to fix it, and my neighbor was really grateful. Then she said, "Hold on a second," and went to the kitchen. 5 minutes later, she came back and handed me 2 candies. "Thank you so much," she said. I told her it was my pleasure, but she added, "My kids? Well, my son Vanya and daughter, they only come to visit once a year for my birthday. They don't even call or write. Look at me, my grandkids have completely forgotten about me." Tears started to stream down her face. "Come on, don't cry. I'll keep coming by. Just say thank you. You really helped me out today. Just go back to your place, that's all I need." Seriously, when I got home, I immediately called my parents because I was feeling really down after visiting the neighbor. Does she really deserve that kind of treatment? You raise your kids and they just don't care. But when she's gone, they'll be quick to take care of the apartment. Remember, Mom has an apartment. By the evening, I started feeling better though. Katya texted me about something. "Katya, my friend, is coming over tomorrow. We can't really stay together long term because of some obligations, but it's temporary. For now, I'm just happy with what we have. We can't really stay together long term because of some obligations, but it's temporary. For now, I'm just happy with what we have. She said she'd arrive around lunchtime and that I should meet her. I definitely agreed and spent the rest of the day tidying up the apartment. I woke up at 7 a.m. on my day off, probably because I'm a bit nervous about the upcoming meeting. I didn't have much to do, so I couldn't go back to sleep. I took a shower, went to the store, and kept myself busy with random stuff. Anyway, I managed to pass the time somehow. Finally, I got the call. She told me I could head out, so I quickly got ready and stepped outside to get some fresh air. I unwrapped a candy that this old lady had given me and popped it in my mouth, but literally a second later, it flew out onto the pavement. It tasted so gross. Who knows how long it had been sitting around? What a disaster. Anyway, we decided not to let that ruin our day and headed to my place first, planning to figure out our plans later. A couple of hours later, we were standing at my apartment door when suddenly I started feeling kind of off. My vision got a little dim and my legs felt weak. I sat down on my jacket and grabbed my head. "Hey, what's up?" someone asked. I said, "I don't know. I just started feeling really bad all of a sudden." They asked if I could get up. I said, "Yeah." I managed to walk into the room and lay down on the couch. Because of this weird incident and my health, I ended up wasting the whole weekend. Katya and I didn't go anywhere. We just stayed home. Well, at least I got a break from work. I haven't gone back yet, so I got to rest at home for a week or two. For the first 3 days, I barely got up. It really helped me out. I started getting groceries delivered to my house, and when things got a bit easier, I gradually ventured out into the yard. One day, while I was sitting on a bench outside, I ran into Aunt Toma, that neighbor. She noticed me and came over asking, "Hey, kiddo, what happened to you? I haven't seen you around. I've been looking from my window and you never come out." I told her, "I don't know. I just haven't been feeling great. I've been lying down for 3 days, and now I'm just starting to get out a little." "Oh my," she exclaimed, throwing her hands up. "What's going on with you?" Aunt Toma asked, and then she quickly turned away from me. I turned my head the other way and caught a glimpse of a smirk on her face. It seemed like she was thinking, "Come on, grandson, let's go to my place. I'll brew you some tea and feed you. You look all down." Honestly, I didn't want to visit my neighbor at all, not even a little bit, but out of politeness, I didn't have the heart to say no. I figured I could stick around for half an hour. It wouldn't hurt me. Plus, her family never comes to see her anyway. When I showed up, she perked up a bit and started setting the table. "Here, eat something," she said, placing a plate on the table with those words. In the middle of the table, there was a crusty loaf of rye bread, and the kettle was boiling on the stove. That was our whole meal. Tea without sugar, bread, and empty pasta. It felt off to me looking at it. "Auntie Tom, let me order you something," I said. "Oh, no need for that. It's fine." "At least you should eat something, old lady," I said, feeling a bit sad. She looked at me and said, "Don't worry about me." I tried to cook, but it just reminded me of her. I silently ate the cheap pasta, which tasted bland, slimy, and like cold mush. Ugh, how am I gonna finish this? Suddenly I noticed something outside the window. It got dark. Could it be that they forecasted rain today? With the sudden change in weather, I started feeling dizzy. I held my head with one hand and dropped my fork with the other, and it clattered. They had warned me that I looked a bit off. The skin around my eyes had noticeably darkened. I thought it was probably just the lighting.
"So, how's it taste?"
she asked in a squeaky voice. I replied shortly. Suddenly I felt something strange in my mouth. There was some movement, and without thinking, I spat out a white mush. Right on the L, there was this wet clump of huge white larvae. Like, what the hell? Those noodles had been sitting there since the 90s or something. Meanwhile, this old lady started bursting out laughing. I just stared at her, and after a couple of seconds, I caught some movement out of the corner of my eye. The whole plate was crammed with these gross white worms and larvae, wriggling all over each other. It was so disgusting that everything in my stomach ended up on the floor. The candy I had earlier was still there, probably from the war or something. Now she wanted to feed me worms. Fine, but how could I not notice that the pencil didn't like it? With a clear mockery in her voice, she asked,
What's your problem?
I told her to shove it. Now I get why kids don't want to visit you. You'd think my comment would hurt her feelings, or at least make her mad. But nope, she just laughed even harder. All right, I need to get out of here. Or better yet, maybe go to the hospital after that meal. While the crazy old lady was laughing like there was no tomorrow, I stepped out into the hallway, put on my shoes, and glanced back at her, and meanwhile, she was getting up from the table. I quickly made my way over, and for some reason, I suddenly felt this overwhelming sense of panic. I ran down the hallway like a bat out of hell, frantically trying to think of what to do. The best idea I could come up with was to hide in one of the rooms. I yanked the door open, rushed in, and slammed it shut. Luckily, there was a bolt, so I locked it. Just then, I heard pounding on the door. You can't get out of here. You hear me? You can't get out. She screamed from the other side. I was trying to figure out how to escape. Calling the police is not an option. It would take them too long to get here. I was scared to go out to that old lady. Who knows what's going on in her head? I don't even think someone with a voice like that is really a person. The door was shaking like crazy, and if that thing gets any closer to me, I looked around the room and realized I had nothing to block the entrance. Damn, what do I do now? Is jumping out the window really the only way out? It's the 5th floor, after all. Wait, what's that? At first I didn't notice what was off about this room. There was really no furniture, but that's not what got to me. The walls were covered with some kind of twisted icons, but they weren't really icons at all. They were just distorted faces with hideous features painted on every canvas. Above their heads were crosses, but they were all upside down. I wouldn't be surprised if that old lady painted them herself. Just then, my confusion was interrupted by the creaking of a wooden box, and then that scream. It was definitely from her. There was nothing left of the old woman. Her lips were chewed up and bloody, her teeth were oddly long and twisted, and her eyes were as black as tar. The last thing I remember is a sharp smell of ammonia that made me open my eyes to a bright light. It hurt, so I squinted and heard a voice right above me.
Young man, how are you feeling?
What happened? Don't make any sudden moves. You fell out of a 5th floor window. You have a spinal injury, the paramedic said. Later, they took me to the hospital, where they told me I had a compression fracture of my spine and multiple bruises and contusions. I couldn't wrap my head around what was happening and just tried to piece everything together. I had a bad dream about sleepwalking and hallucinations. Anyway, it was anything but that creep who lived next door. That same day, my parents came to visit me. The next morning, Oksana showed up. I was expecting her, thinking we needed to sort out some stuff with the media and the contract. But then I saw her. Oksana looked really worn out and wouldn't even meet my eyes. Her guilty expression threw me off a bit, so I spoke first. Hi, she looked at me sadly and said, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have probably turned in that damn thing. What about the apartment? I asked, a bit worried. She was wiping her palms and seemed like she wanted to say something, but her voice kept shaking. I just waited and didn't say anything. After a couple of minutes, she finally managed to pull herself together and, looking out the window, spoke up. I guess you have the right to know. I bought this apartment for myself 5 years ago. The price was noticeably lower than the market average, and people warned me that there had to be a reason for that low price. But I didn't listen. It all started from the very first days. When I moved into that house, the old lady from the apartment across the hall kept hanging out on our landing, which scared me to death. At first, I thought she was just a bit off, but after one incident, I realized it was worse than it seemed. This neighbor somehow lured me into her place, saying she was feeling really bad and didn't know if the doctors would show up. I, being the nice fool, agreed and went into her apartment. She told me to go into her room, and when I got to her bedroom, the lights suddenly went out in the whole place. I wanted to go out into the hallway and check if the power had gone out, but suddenly I felt cold fingers on my neck, and I couldn't breathe. I tried to scream, but all that came out was a raspy sound. I don't know how I managed to break free, but I stumbled around the apartment, feeling my way. I hit my forehead against the front door. It was locked. I kept yanking on the handle over and over, but nothing happened. I was calling for help at the top of my lungs. My neighbor came running, and just as he responded, I felt this sharp, unbearable pain in my leg. I was fighting back, but I couldn't do anything about it because it was impossible to navigate without any light. Pain was shooting through different parts of my body, and over time, I started to weaken and then completely passed out. Later, I found out that my neighbor called the police, and when they broke down the door, they had to call an ambulance too. That lunatic stabbed me a few times, and I ended up needing a blood transfusion. They put me in a psychiatric hospital, but I don't remember how long I was there. After that, I moved out, and the apartment sat empty for a few years. About a year ago, I was thinking about selling it. But that neighbor always seemed to know when I came back with clients, and she'd immediately put on some sort of one-woman show. So I gave up on that idea and decided to rent it out first. You were the one who responded. I didn't think anything would happen with you. After all, you're a guy and can handle yourself if needed. How did this happen, Oksana? The thing is, she's not exactly human, I replied. What do you mean? The landlord asked, surprised. I told her everything that had been going on with me and why I ended up there. She listened to me carefully afterward. She quickly said goodbye and promised to stop by the next day. But the next day and the day after that, I didn't see anyone. Instead, my parents called to let me know they took all my stuff. Then a big chunk of money from Oksana showed up in my account. Sorry, you won't have to come to this apartment anymore. Read the message that came with the money transfer.